Smells like teen spirit. Jake slouched against the graffiti-covered wall of Westbrook High's gymnasium, his shaggy hair falling over his eyes ringed with dark circles. The deafening roar of distorted guitars blasted from cheap speakers, drowning out the mundane chatter of his classmates. He took a long drag from his cigarette, letting the acrid smoke fill his lungs before exhaling slowly. This was supposed to be the highlight of senior year, the homecoming dance. But to Jake, it felt like just another night of forced merriment and shallow connections. He watched his peers gyrate awkwardly on the dance floor, their faces a mix of simulated excitement and underlying anxiety. "You look about as thrilled to be here as I am," came a sarcastic voice beside him. Jake turned to see Sarah, her dark hair streaked with neon blue, her lips curved in a sardonic smile. She held out an unmarked bottle, eyebrow raised in silent question. He hesitated momentarily before accepting, taking a swig of the bitter liquid. "What gave it away?" he asked, matching her tone. Sarah gestured vaguely at the scene before them. "All of this. It's so pointless. We're supposed to care about homecoming kings and queens when the world's falling apart around us." Jake nodded, feeling a spark of kinship with this girl he barely knew. "Yeah, I get it. Everyone's so caught up in their little bubble. Like none of it matters." "Exactly," Sarah agreed, taking back the bottle. "So, what do you say we blow this popsicle stand and find something real to do?" A grin spread across Jake's face, his first genuine emotion all night. "Lead the way." They slipped out of the gym unnoticed, and the fantastic night air was a welcome relief after the stifling atmosphere inside. Sarah's beat-up Volkswagen, covered in band stickers and political slogans, waited in the parking lot. As they drove through the quiet streets of their small town, Jake felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The facades were falling away, leaving behind something raw and honest. "Where are we going?" he asked, not caring about the answer. Sarah shrugged, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Anywhere but here. I've got a place in mind, though. Ever been to the old quarry?" Jake shook his head. He'd heard rumors about the abandoned site, a popular spot for parties and general mischief. "You're in for a treat then," Sarah said with a wink. The quarry loomed before them, a gaping wound in the earth illuminated by the pale moonlight. Sarah parked at the edge, and they climbed out, the gravel crunching beneath their feet. "Come on," she said, leading him towards a rickety-looking platform overlooking the water-filled pit below. Jake's heart raced as they stood at the edge, staring into the inky blackness. He could feel the energy radiating off Sarah, a mixture of excitement and something darker. "You ever feel like screaming?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake nodded, understanding the sentiment all too well. The constant pressure to conform and care about things that seemed so trivial in the grand scheme of things, built up inside, until you felt like you might explode. "Then let's do it," Sarah said, a wild glint in her eye. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. Their voices rang out in unison, raw and primal. Jake felt something break loose inside him, years of pent-up frustration and disillusionment pouring out in that cathartic cry. When they finally fell silent, breathless and exhilarated, Sarah turned to him with a grin. "Feel better?" Jake nodded, surprised to find that he did. "Yeah. I do." "Good," she said, reaching into her pocket. "Because the night's just getting started." She pulled out a small bag of pills, offering one to Jake. He hesitated, his mind racing through all the anti-drug lectures he'd sat through over the years. But at that moment, surrounded by the vast emptiness of the quarry, those warnings seemed as hollow and meaningless as everything else. He took the pill. The world shifted, with vibrant colors and intense sounds. Jake felt he could see clearly for the first time, cutting through the fog of societal expectations and ingrained beliefs. They spent hours talking, really talking, in a way Jake had never experienced before. Sarah spoke of her dreams of becoming a musician and using her art to challenge the status quo. Jake opened up about his own frustrations, the pressure to follow a predetermined path and become someone he wasn't sure he wanted to be. As the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky, they found themselves lying on the hood of Sarah's car, staring up at the fading stars. "You know," Jake said, his voice hoarse from talking all night, "I always thought I was alone in feeling this way. Like I was the only one who saw through all the bullshit." Sarah turned to look at him, her expression serious. "You're not alone, Jake. There are more of us out there than you think. We just have to find each other." He nodded, feeling a sense of purpose stirring within him. "So what do we do now?" "We wake people up," Sarah said, sitting up with newfound energy. "We make them see what's going on. Through music, art, whatever it takes." Jake sat up too, his mind racing with possibilities. "You think we can make a difference?" Sarah shrugged. "I don't know. But isn't it worth trying? Better than just going through the motions, pretending everything's fine when it's not." As they drove back into town, the sleepy streets beginning to come to life, Jake felt like a different person than the one who had reluctantly attended the dance the night before. The apathy that had plagued him for so long was replaced by a burning desire to shake things up and challenge the system that had left him so disconnected. Over the next few weeks, Jake and Sarah became inseparable. They spent their days planning and their nights executing small acts of rebellion. They plastered the school with thought-provoking flyers, organized impromptu concerts in the park, and started a zine filled with poetry and artwork questioning the status quo. Word spread quickly. Other disaffected teens began to gravitate towards them, drawn by their message and fearless attitude. What had started as two lonely outcasts had grown into a movement. But as their influence grew, so did the pushback. Parents complained about their negative influence. The school administration cracked down on their activities, and local police started paying closer attention to their gatherings. Jake and Sarah found themselves at a crossroads. They could back down and tone things down to avoid further conflict. Or they could push harder, risking real consequences to make a lasting impact. The decision came to a head one crisp autumn evening. Their latest underground concert had drawn a massive crowd, the abandoned warehouse vibrating with the energy of hundreds of teens united in their discontent. As Sarah's band played their final song, a searing indictment of societal apathy, Jake looked out over the sea of faces. He saw hope, anger, and a burning desire for change. But he also saw fear. The fear of standing out, of challenging a system that seemed too big to take on. At that moment, he knew what he had to do. Grabbing the microphone, Jake addressed the crowd. His voice shook at first but grew more robust with each word. "Look around you," he said, gesturing to the dilapidated building. "This is where they want us. Hidden away, voiceless, powerless. They tell us to sit down, shut up, and fall in line. To care about homecoming games and prom queens, while the world burns around us." The crowd grew quiet, hanging on his every word. "But we see through the lies," Jake continued, his voice rising. "We know that there's more to life than following their rules. We have the power to change things, to make our voices heard. But it won't be easy. They'll try to silence us, to beat us down. The question is, are we going to let them?" A roar went up from the crowd, a resounding no that shook the rafters. "Then let's show them who we are," Jake shouted. "Let's take our message to the streets, the airwaves, and anyone who will listen. We are the voice of a generation that refuses to be ignored." Jake felt Sarah's hand slip into his, as the crowd erupted in cheers. He turned to see her smiling, tears glistening in her eyes. "You ready for this?" she asked, squeezing his hand. Jake nodded, feeling more alive than he ever had before. "Born ready." They led the crowd out of the warehouse and into the streets, their voices raised in a chorus of dissent. Cars honked, and people stared, but Jake and Sarah kept moving forward hand in hand. They were still determining exactly what the future held. There would be obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But as they marched through the town that had once felt like a prison, Jake realized something profound. It wasn't about changing the whole world overnight. It was about waking up each day and choosing to live authentically, question everything, and fight for what you believe in. It was about finding and using your voice, even when it shook. It was about connecting with others who shared your fire, and building something meaningful together. As the sun set on their impromptu parade, casting long shadows across the faces of his friends and fellow rebels, Jake felt a sense of peace wash over him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just going through the motions. He was wide awake, fully present, ready to face whatever came next. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was now walking alone. And in the end, that made all the difference.